They mocked her limp. The insult was never spoken aloud, not directly, but it echoed in the spaces between words, in the quick, dismissive glances and the smirks traded between young commandos who moved with the fluid arrogance of apex predators. 4 of those commandos would fall in seconds. Their overconfidence was a liability, a flaw in their armor that could get them all killed in a real engagement. She would teach them a lesson they would never forget, not with a lecture, but with action. No one in the entire facility knew her real name or what the slight, uneven gait truly represented. That knowledge was buried under layers of classification, a ghost story whispered only in the highest echelons of command. Her name, for the purposes of this assignment, was Ilara Vance. She arrived at the Blackwood Advanced Training Facility on a Tuesday, carrying a single duffel bag and a file assigning her as a civilian technical observer. The limp was the first thing they saw. It was a subtle hitch in her left leg, a fractional delay that broke the rhythm of a normal walk. To the soldiers of Special Operations Group 7, men sculpted by relentless training into paragons of physical perfection, it was a glaring defect, a weakness. She was in her late 40s, her face a map of experiences they couldn't begin to decipher, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe, functional bun. She wore simple cargo pants and a plain shirt, blending in like a sparrow in an aviary of eagles. As she crossed the main quad, the quiet judgment followed her like a shadow. They saw an aging bureaucrat, a pencil pusher sent to get in their way. She saw angles, sight lines, and tactical vulnerabilities in the base's layout. She saw everything but them. Colonel Davies summoned her to his office within the hour. His posture was ramrod straight, his uniform immaculate, his expression a carefully curated mask of authority. He held her file between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Vance," he began, not offering a seat. "Civilian consultant. Your credentials are." Vague. He tossed the folder onto his polished desk. It landed with a soft, dismissive thud. "Pentagon wants a third-party assessment of our new close quarters combat protocols." "I'm told that's you." His eyes scanned her from head to toe, lingering for a moment on her leg. The unspoken question hung in the air. What could you possibly know about combat? "Let's be clear," Davies continued, his voice crisp and condescending. "My men are the best. They don't need a civilian looking over their shoulder and writing reports about methodologies you can't possibly understand. Observe, stay out of the way, and do not, under any circumstances, interfere with my training schedule." He was a man who believed in the rigid structure of the system that had promoted him. She was an anomaly, an unwelcome disruption to his perfect, ordered world. She offered no defense, no explanation. She simply gave a short, single nod. "Understood, Colonel." The brevity of her reply seemed to irritate him more than an argument would have. He waved a hand toward the door, a clear dismissal. For the next 3 days, Ilara became a silent fixture. She stood in the elevated observation gantry overlooking the kill house, a sprawling, reconfigurable maze of rooms and corridors designed to simulate hostile environments. Down below, teams of commandos ran drills with brutal, percussive energy. They were a symphony of controlled violence, fast, loud, and overwhelmingly aggressive. They breached doors with explosive force and cleared rooms with a torrent of simulated fire. Ilara watched, her expression unreadable. Her focus was absolute. She saw their speed, but also their haste. She saw their strength, but also their reliance on it. They moved like a battering ram, effective against a static defense, but clumsy, predictable. They bunched up in doorways, creating fatal funnels. They communicated in shouts, broadcasting their positions. They were powerful, but they were not efficient. During a break, she walked through the facility's small museum of equipment. Her fingers brushed against an old tactical vest on a mannequin, a model designated Stalker 7. The fabric was worn, the custom pouches frayed at the edges. A flicker of something, a distant memory, crossed her face before vanishing. Later, as she leaned against the gantry railing, her sleeve slid up her wrist, revealing for a moment the faint, faded outline of a tattoo. A kestrel, wings folded in a steep dive. No one noticed. They were all watching the spectacle below. The pressure began to build on Friday. A delegation of top brass was visiting for a live-fire demonstration of the new CQC doctrine. The reputation of Colonel Davies and his unit was on the line. The lead team, Alpha Squad, was led by Lieutenant Rourke, a young officer whose confidence bordered on outright arrogance. He and his men were the stars of the facility, holders of every training record. They entered the kill house for the final demonstration, the air thick with expectation. The scenario was a complex hostage rescue in a simulated embassy. It went wrong almost immediately. Rourke's point man, eager to impress, missed the pressure plate for a simulated IED by a fraction of an inch. The alarm blared, signaling the explosion. Their element of surprise was gone. Panicked, they stormed the first room too quickly. Their communication, once sharp, dissolved into a garble of overlapping shouts. In the tight confines of a hallway, they clustered together, a perfect target. A series of pop-up targets, representing hidden hostiles, activated. In the control room, the red lights on the monitors blinked on, one after another. Alpha Team was systematically neutralized. The entire drill lasted less than a minute. The silence that followed was damning. Colonel Davies's face was a thundercloud of fury and humiliation. "Run it again." Davies barked into the intercom, his voice tight with rage. Rourke and his team, faces flushed with shame, began the slow walk back to the starting point. The mockery they had once directed at the limping woman was now turned inward, a bitter pill of failure. As the facility technicians reset the targets, Alara moved. She descended the metal stairs from the gantry, her limp more pronounced on the steps. She didn't walk to the control room. She walked directly to the entry point of the kill house. The Commandos watched her approach, their exhaustion and anger mixing with confusion. "Colonel," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the tense atmosphere. "Permission to demonstrate an alternative entry?" Rourke let out a short, incredulous laugh. "With that leg? You'll trip the first wire." The insult was finally out in the open, raw and ugly. Colonel Davies looked from his defeated team to the calm, unassuming woman. He was desperate. His program, his reputation, was crumbling in front of his superiors. He waved a dismissive hand. "Fine. Whatever. Show them something. Consultant." He didn't expect anything. This was just a way to deflect, to stall. Alara walked to the weapons table and picked up a standard training rifle, checking its weight and balance. She didn't bother with the heavy helmet or body armor the Commandos wore. She put on a simple pair of eye protection glasses. The 4 members of a different team, Bravo Squad, were positioned inside as the opposing force. They exchanged smug grins, preparing to humor the old woman before putting her down hard. The buzzer sounded sharp and loud. What followed was not a drill. It was a lesson in physics and fear. Alara didn't charge in. She used the doorframe itself as a shield, a pivot point. Her first movement was a swift, lateral step that seemed impossible for her leg, a motion that was less a step and more a fluid transfer of weight. This single action completely altered the angle of engagement, placing her outside the primary field of fire of the first commando waiting inside. A controlled pair of shots from her training rifle, precise and economical, struck his vest sensors. One down. She didn't pause. She used the momentum of her turn to flow into the room, her limp now part of a strange, rolling gait that made her profile unnervingly small and unpredictable. The second commando, hearing the shots, turned from his position. She didn't engage him directly. She fired a single round into a steel support beam near his head. The loud clang and spark of impact drew his attention for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She closed the distance, her rifle coming up to tap him out. The third commando was in an adjoining room. He heard the commotion and prepared to ambush her as she came through the door. But she didn't come through the door. She kicked the base of a portable partition, sending it toppling into his path. As he stumbled back, she was already there, having used the noise as cover to move through a different opening. He was neutralized before he could recover. The final commando was Rourke's second in command, a sergeant named Griggs, considered the fastest marksman on the base. He had her cornered, he thought. She was in a small office with only one exit. He squared himself, rifle ready. She didn't emerge. She fired a single shot through the drywall beside the doorframe. The round, designed to fragment on impact, peppered the wall where his head would have been had he been leaning in. He flinched. In that instant of hesitation, she was on him, a gray blur of motion. The muzzle of her training rifle pressed firmly against his helmet before he could even process her movement. The entire engagement had taken 12 seconds. Dead silence descended upon the kill house. In the observation gentry, the visiting brass were on their feet, leaning against the glass. Down on the floor, Griggs stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. The smirks were gone. The arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a chilling, profound sense of shock. Colonel Davies stared, his mouth slightly agape. The woman he had dismissed as a bureaucratic nuisance had just dismantled a team of his elite operators with the terrifying grace of a surgeon. The entire foundation of his doctrine, speed, aggression, overwhelming force, had been exposed as clumsy and inefficient. He cleared his throat, his voice regaining its authority but losing its condescending edge. Again, he commanded, his voice now directed at the control room technicians. Full hostile saturation. Randomize all targets. Set course to maximum difficulty. He then looked directly at Alara. You. Against the clock. Alone, this was no longer a simple demonstration. It was a challenge, a desperate attempt to quantify what he had just witnessed. He needed to know if it was a fluke or something more. Alara's expression didn't change. She walked back to the staging area, inserted a fresh magazine into the training rifle, and took her position at the starting point. She gave a short nod to the control booth. This time, every single person in the facility was watching. Every commando, every instructor, every officer stood in silent attention. The buzzer blared. She moved. Her flow was mesmerizing. The limp was no longer a defect. It was a tool. She used it to create an unpredictable rhythm, a cadence of movement that defied expectation. She didn't just walk or run. She glided, using a controlled fall to drop her elevation before popping up in an unexpected spot. She cleared rooms not by entering them, but by commanding them from the outside, using angles and ricochets to neutralize targets before she even crossed the threshold. It was a masterclass in geometry and violence. She completed the entire course, a run that took Rourke's full team nearly 3 minutes and 58 seconds. She had not just beaten the record, she had obliterated it. While Alara was methodically rewriting the facility's understanding of combat, a frantic aide hurried over to Colonel Davies in the control room. He carried a secure datapad, its screen glowing with a high-priority seal. "Sir," the aide whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "This just came through. Secure channel. From Joint Special Operations Command." The message was flagged with a designation Davies had only ever read about in historical briefings. Project Nightjar. Eyes only, he took the datapad. He thumbed past the security warnings and opened the file. The first thing he saw was a photograph of a woman in her late 20s. She wore desert camouflage and full Spec Ops gear, her face lean and hard, her eyes burning with an intensity that transcended the old, grainy image. It was Alara Vance, but a version from another life. Her file was brutally sparse, whole sections redacted with black bars. But the citations that remained were the stuff of legend. Medals for valor, so secret they were never awarded in public. Commendations from operations that were officially denied ever having taken place. The final entry was a medical report. It detailed catastrophic injuries sustained during a mission codenamed Whispering Bell, a vehicle-borne IED. She had shielded 3 members of her team with her own body. The report listed a shattered femur, a reconstructed hip, and extensive nerve damage. Career-ending injuries. At the bottom of the page was her operational call sign. Kestrel Davies looked up from the screen, his gaze locking on the faded tattoo of the diving bird on her wrist, now clearly visible. The aide leaned in again. "Sir, the stalker, 7 vest in the display case. Intelligence confirms it was the standard issue, for nightjar units. The modifications, the quick-release system, the weight distribution. The file says they were designed by Kestrel herself. Davies looked back through the observation glass. He wasn't watching a consultant. He was watching a living legend. The final target's sensor blinked red. The course was clear. Ilara lowered the rifle, her breathing steady, controlled. She methodically ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and placed the weapon on a nearby table. The silence in the kill house was absolute, thick with a mixture of awe and shame. The commandos who had lined the walls to watch were frozen in place, their minds struggling to reconcile the limping woman from the quad with the unstoppable force they had just witnessed. She turned to leave, her job done. As she approached the exit, Lieutenant Rourke, his face pale and his arrogance completely stripped away, suddenly snapped to perfect, rigid attention. "Ma'am," he said, his voice sharp and clear, imbued with a respect that bordered on reverence. It was like a spell breaking. One by one, the other commandos in the kill house followed his lead, their boots clicking against the concrete floor as they stood at attention. On the gentry above, the instructors, men who had sneered at her mere presence, did the same. The visiting generals looked at each other, their expressions somber with understanding. Colonel Davies walked down from the control room and onto the floor. He met her halfway. He didn't offer platitudes or apologies. Words were insufficient. He simply stopped in front of her and extended his hand. She took it. Her grip was firm, her eyes meeting his without accusation or triumph. It was a handshake that acknowledged a debt of knowledge and paid a long-overdue measure of respect. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to the assembled soldiers, a gesture that encompassed them all. Then she turned and walked out of the kill house. As the adrenaline of the drill faded, the familiar, uneven rhythm of her limp returned, a quiet reminder of the price she had paid for her expertise. She did not look back. She did not need to. Her lesson had been delivered. The final image that lingered in the minds of everyone present was of the empty doorway she had just passed through. The men remained at attention, staring at the space she had occupied, their worldviews permanently altered. The low, steady hum of the facility's ventilation system was the only sound. On the wall of the nearby museum, the old, worn Stalker 7 vest seemed to stand straighter, its worn fabric no longer just a relic of the past, but a silent testament to the quiet, unassuming legend who had just reminded them all what true strength looked like.